With these videos, we hope to give the candidates an opportunity to share a bit about themselves in a more personal way, giving the clergy, convention deputies, and wider diocese an opportunity to get to know them. To view each candidate's resume, spiritual, autobiography, and written materials, please visit pittanglican.org. For our first question, we asked each candidate to give us their name, current role, and other places they have served.
Well, first thing is important to say is my name is Alec, spelled with an X but pronounced with a C, Alec Cameron. That's my full name. And as I talk about my current role and where I've served before, it's not exactly a straight line. I currently serve as the president and CEO of the Isaiah 40 Foundation, which is a Christian ministry of healing, counseling, and education, which operates in both Canada and the United States. And our mission as an organization is to help people kind of unearth the fullness of life that is in Christ Jesus. And we do that through counseling and conferences and kind of a cohort ministry. And that's kind of the sense of what I've been doing currently. But I've been ordained for 31 years. I originally served in the Anglican Diocese of Montreal and the Anglican Church of Canada in 3 different congregations, first urban, then a rural congregation, and then a suburban congregation. And then after 10 years of ministry in that diocese, the Lord rather unexpectedly called me out of full-time ministry, and there is a story there, and into the world of software development and medical informatics. And that career change brought me to Vermont, in the United States, and where I worked for a company that was soon bought by GE Healthcare, and I worked for GE Healthcare for basically 10 years. And when I left GE, I was director of software engineering for one of their businesses. But also while at GE, I was bivocationally planting a church in Vermont. It's called St. Timothy Burlington. It still exists. And at a given point, I left GE to pursue that church plant full time. And how I got ultimately to Isaiah 40, where I am now, is about 6 years ago, the founder of that ministry died, and I almost literally inherited it after many years of involvement on the board and other things. And in that ministry, I've established a legal presence for the ministry here in the United States and worked on kind of bringing some new vision and direction to the organization. And 3 years ago, we moved from Vermont to Chicago and brought the ministry of Isaiah 40 there, primarily to partner with church planters in the Diocese of the Upper Midwest to provide pastoral care and systems of pastoral care and training for church planters and folks like that.
We asked each candidate to introduce their spouse so that we can get to know a bit about them and their family.
So I have been married to Tamara since 1987. We met at an Anglican church in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we were both attending during university. And what I would say most, I think, about Tamara, so one of our family sayings is think adventure. And for nearly 35 years now, she really has been my partner on this adventure, which has taken many twists and turns that we were not expecting and that we didn't see coming. And she has been, all I would say, is the best partner imaginable over the last 35 years now. We have 4 grown children. They're all adults, and they mostly behave like that. And 3 grandchildren. Our eldest is married and lives in Ottawa, Ontario in Canada. She's the mother of our 3 grandchildren. Our second daughter lives and works in Chicago, and the 2 youngest, a son and a daughter, are in Montreal, where they work and are in university. And 2 things I really want to say what I appreciate most about my kids. First is they are all creatives. They all express themselves artistically in different ways, which I really, really appreciate. They get that largely from their mother and less from me. And I think the second thing about my kids, I am really impressed and proud by the way in which they are supportive and encouraging to each other. It is, as a parent, very gratifying to see your children, your adult children, liking and enjoying each other and loving and supporting each other. So that's what I really appreciate about them.
I enjoy the largeness of our family. When we are together, it is quite loud and boisterous, and sometimes that's hard, especially as I'm away from the fullness of that more often. I'm more unused to it. But I love the life and the fullness that really happens when we're together. I think all of my children are really interesting people. They're really different, each one of them, but they're really fun to be around, and I enjoy their senses of humor. I enjoy their personalities. I enjoy the real difference that they have. And I think the other thrill and highlight for me is, as Alec mentioned, I love that our kids love each other and enjoy each other's company a lot. That's a real blessing. In terms of my grandkids, I don't get to be with them very often, especially with COVID. It's been hard to get to Canada, and so I wish I could spend more time in closeness with them, watching them grow. They're from ages 10 down to 2. But I just love the moments when I can be with them and make them laugh and play with them. I think the thing that comes to mind as I think about calling is faithful. That God just asked me to be faithful. And in the two worlds that I live in terms of what I do most often is ministry and art making. I work for the Isaiah 40 Foundation as a director of spiritual formation, and so I do a lot of spiritual direction and one-on-one coaching, largely with church leaders and church planters. In my other world, I'm a creative. I'm an art maker. I do ceramic art. And when I first began to do the ceramic art more full time, I spent a lot of time thinking about where am I going with this, and what will it look like to be successful at that? What will that look like? And as I prayed about that and thought about that for a long time, what I realized is, what success is going to look like is showing up. I'm gonna do what I do as best as I can, and I'm going to show up, and see what God does with that. And what was interesting for me is I decided that in a very small place of making ceramic art. But over the years, God has brought that farther and farther out. And so I really think that that's what I think my calling is to show up and to do the best that I can in any situation, and trust that God is the one who's doing the work, not me. In the ministry part of my life, I love the moments when I have the privilege to see somebody see God in a new way. Those moments when they realize that God is bigger than they had imagined that he would be. And to be part of that in people's lives really is exciting, and what keeps me in that work. And in terms of the art making, I think in some ways it's the same thing, because it's those moments when I see God show up. And sometimes even when I'm creating something and it comes out of the kiln when I'm all done with it, I think, wow, God made that. I mean, he used me and used my hands, but he's the one doing that work. And so I think that's what most makes my heart sing, is seeing God show up.
Can I just add something? We have a great tradition in our family, which has to do with the kiln, because after the glaze firing, the bisque firing is not as exciting, but the glaze firing goes in sort of dull, and then it comes out, the glazes are finished, and we call it Kiln Christmas, because we all go down, open up the kiln, and bring out all these things that are just these delights and these beauties, and it's just it feels like Christmas every time. Mm-hmm. So,
and it seems, in a lot of ways, it seems like those two things are unrelated, the ministry life and the art making life, but they're really not, because they're both creative pursuits of looking and watching God create and make and shape and form. And so that I've learned that they're actually both, they're linked, and they're both callings for me.
What strengths would you bring to the role of bishop?
Well, I'd like to frame that in the context a little bit of, things that give me delight too. And one of the things that I do on a regular basis is I spend a lot of one-on-one time with individual Christian leaders, talking about their lives, coaching them. And, you know, if you define revival as someone coming alive in Jesus, I have the rare, and I understand that it's rare, privilege of seeing revival every week of my life. That's not an exaggeration. That is not hyperbole. There is always an incident during the week in my interactions with people where there is that experience of people understanding the fullness of Jesus, the largeness of Jesus, in a new way, and it's just fantastic. And so a lot of that has to do with healing work in people's lives. And I've read in your diocesan profile that it's been rough on and off for the last, 10 or 15 years. With the exit from the Episcopal Church, the particular challenges of this diocese during the beginning, the launching of the ACNA, and I think also the struggles of Bishop Jim's time here, which was, I think, from what I've heard, painful for some and at the very least confusing for others. That's a lot to process in a short period of time. And healing and wholeness and forgiveness and reconciliation are at the very core of everything that we do at Isaiah 40. Helping people and sometimes whole communities unearth that reality of Jesus in transforming and healing and bringing us forward. And that's one of the things that most motivates me is the opportunity to help people in that process. And it is my jam. It is what I love. And that is something that I bring to the table as we come here. I think also your profile talks about a sense of bringing together, a sense of togetherness or unity or vision for the diocese. And one of the things that I've done at Isaiah 40 in the last little while is actually done exactly that. As we have expanded into 2 countries, there's been a real challenge of how do we function, how do we live together under a common vision and mission as an organization. So we spend a time and a process thinking that through, listening, uncovering and discerning. And I really think vision comes out, is not something that stands out in front, it's something that comes out of the body, out of the community. And so listening together and reflecting and responding to each other in that time of the major stakeholders in Isaiah 40, we came to a new sense of, it wasn't a new sense of vision, it was just an unearthing of the vision that's actually already there. And then now we're in the process of starting to implement what that vision is like. And it's been an exciting process, and we've been doing it. And I think I bring that to the table as well. I already talked a little bit about pastoral care and oversight. It's really at the heart of my first passion is pastoral care, particularly of leaders. The Lord, for whatever reason, for the last 10 or 15 years, has brought into our lives, particularly young Christian leaders, campus ministers and others, who have needed coaching or mentoring or sometimes support in the middle of what is often challenging and difficult ministry lives. And that is something that has literally come our way. It's not something we've necessarily sought out, but it's come our way, both of us. And I've been doing it for a long time, and I think it's really important for clergy and the life of a diocese. And it's also, I think, the other thing that I bring to the world is I learned and gained a lot from my 10 years in the business world. My time with GE was deeply beneficial, in which I learned a lot of things. GE does a great job at leadership development. They are good at it, and they invest in leaders, and they invested in me, and I'm really, really thankful for that. And I learned a lot about things like managing growth and change in organizations, which is not simple. I learned a lot about leading teams, both small and large, and really the importance of good processes and structures for the health of a business or an organization. And so I bring also all of that ultimately to the table.
What do you see as particular challenges for the church and clergy of our day?
Articulating the gospel in a way that is compelling to our culture, and we have a lot to learn. A generation or so ago, Leslie Newbigin wrote a great book called Foolishness to the Greeks, which was really a missional book about, ultimately the challenge of the Christian church that was perceived by the culture as being intellectually crippled or intellectually light or intellectually dishonest, and it was an impediment to the mission and evangelism of the church. And I think it's less of an impediment now. I think, to pull the other part of Paul's articulation in his letter to the Corinthians, our biggest problem is now we're a stumbling block to the Jews, a scandal to the Jews. I had a conversation with a young man who is not antagonistic to the faith, a young man for whom the traditional biblical view of marriage and sexuality is a stumbling block for him. And so in our culture, we are struggling because we are, I think, often seen as judgers and haters. And what we believe and what our convictions, and convictions that we as an ACNA were founded around, have actually become stumbling blocks, scandals to the culture around us. And while we need to remain faithful to the Scriptures, we need to figure out how we articulate this, how we articulate, and it may not be about leading with this, but how we articulate the gospel of Jesus, the love of Jesus, the power of Jesus to meet us where we are, to people who wonder if we don't love, that we don't care, that we have hard hearts. This is, I think, in part the work of evangelism in our culture today. We are a scandal to many people. The good news, of course, however, this is not the first time that that's been the case in the life of the church. And I was reading an introduction to a collection of the writings of Justin Martyr, who was an early apologist for the church. And really, Justin Martyr was writing because the culture around him thought things about what Christians thought and believed and had convictions around, but they were misunderstood or sometimes inaccurate. And Justin Martyr began that work of apologetics to begin to articulate, no, actually, we think this, not what you're assuming there. We believe that God loves us, not that God hates us. And I think that that's part of the challenge that's in front of us, is understanding how we articulate it. And that may not be first with words and statements. I think also it has to begin ultimately with the leading of our actions and our attitudes. You know, I have loved the life of ministry. It is a humbling privilege to be invited into some most significant and intimate moments of people's lives, into the births of their children through baptism, into marriage, into the process of grieving around death, and also as we're invited into people's lives in terms of challenges and crises that they face. I mean, it's an incredible privilege. And also the work ultimately of teaching and equipping people for, as St. Paul says, the ministry of the gospel. I love it, but I am deeply aware that it is not an easy life. One of the things that's hard about being clergy is you know, we work with people all the time, and yet I think so often as clergy our lives are kind of lonely and isolating. That has to do with, I think, sometimes the nature of the beast, but also it has something to do with ourselves. I mean, the ministry does tend to attract independent self-starters, which is great until it's not. And that drive to be independent and isolated ultimately kills us. One of the things that has been really powerful to me in recent years in my life is I've been a part of a clergy covenant group that has met every Thursday morning for years. We meet for an hour and a half, and those are people that I understand, just as I'm with them, that I understand that I am not alone. And as I struggle with things, and I found the challenges of ministry difficult when I've been discouraged, because I have been, when I've been annoyed, because I have been. That is an environment in which I am not alone. I'm a deep sense of not being alone. And I think that that's one of the fundamental challenges of a clergy. It's a fantastic life, and it's not easy. And the ways that we find to encourage clergy not to be isolated and find support is critically important.
You have a day off with no responsibilities. All obligations are met, and you're going to do something you really enjoy. Describe that day.
Well, first of all, that's just a fiction, because obligations are never always met. But if they were, and even if they weren't, sometimes you have to take that time anyway. I'll tell you, I will be up early in the morning. I am a morning person, and I love being up early. I love the quiet of the early morning. I have a walk every morning as I listen and pray. It's a ritual of mine that I'm really, really thankful for. It's a very incarnate way of praying, which I've found has been really fantastic. And when I get home from that, I enjoy a cup of coffee as I continue my prayers. And that would be how my day would likely begin. But then I would probably want to spend the morning, provided it's a decent day, on my bicycle. All the better if it's with some others that want to go cycling with me. I have really enjoyed, I love road biking, and just this past September I had a great weekend with some friends from the church that I attend in Chicago, and we did a 200-mile weekend, camped as we went, and it was a fantastic experience. So that would be a part of my day. I think probably as I think about the afternoon, I think probably be a little project oriented. I do some woodworking. I like having projects around the house. When we moved to Chicago, I said, we need a house that doesn't have projects tomorrow because I'll have other things to do. Bad idea, I need a project. So didn't have any projects, but I created them. And so an afternoon would probably be involved in some sort of work and project around the house that is part of my creative expression. And I think the evening would be around our dinner table with family or friends, with good food and great conversation. That'd be a magic day.
If you are called to be our bishop, what would most excite you about the opportunities ahead?
Ultimately, what would most excite me, it would be equipping and releasing clergy and the people of the diocese for the work of the ministry of the gospel, which is a very vague thing to say, but I want to say two very specific things about that. I think that equipping and releasing would initially involve two things. First, and I do think this needs to be first, I'm excited about walking with individuals and with the diocese as a whole as we do the good biblical work of lamentation. Lamenting the things that have been hard, grieving the hurts and losses that are real but might remain unresolved. You can't go on without dealing with that reality because it will remain there to confuse and to pull us down ultimately. And one person obviously cannot do that for anyone, but it's important, to create opportunities and a culture for that reality in our lives together. And not so that we can just spend all our time lamenting, but rather so that we can actually do that work and get past it, celebrating the good and the fantastic things of the past without wallpapering over the hard stuff. That is exciting work to me. It isn't to everybody, but I love that stuff. And the second, I think, is actually this equipping and releasing people is spending time to listen to clergy, to the people of the diocese, to discern together what is our particular calling. Not assuming what it is, but listen to understand, discover and understand the vision and the calling that God has for this diocese at this time and in this season. It is a process of listening and discovery that is corporate and collaborative. And I would be very excited about that. Jesus, in all of this, remains King and Lord and Savior. And there's a particular work of proclaiming the gospel that he has given to this diocese. I'm excited to discern that, and then, having discerned it, in obedience to him, to work out the fulfilling of that vision, ultimately to declare his name in the great congregation, and all of that to the praise of his glory.